Marketer of the Day, episode 541, Snappa, template-based graphical content marketing for social media, with Christopher Gimmer.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Marketer of the Day podcast. We're talking right now with Christopher Gimmer, and his website and his startup is at snappa.com. That's snappa.com. So Chris is going to tell us about what he's built, what his company is all about, and what you need to know and what not to know. So Chris, glad to be talking to you.
Thanks for having me.
So can you tell us in your own words, what you're up to, what you have going on?
Yeah, so basically we run a software called Snappa, which is an online graphic design tool that is essentially geared towards non-designers. So most of our user base is made up of small business owners, marketers, social media managers. So people that, really are creating content regularly, and they need to be able to design graphics, but they needed to do it quickly, efficiently, and don't really have the resources to hire a full-time designer.
Awesome. And what's really funny about this sort of tool that you have here is that I consider myself sort of an advanced computer guy. I do programming, I make WordPress plugins, but I didn't even know that this sort of tool existed until a couple of years ago. Whenever I saw people crank out all kinds of graphics on their social media pages, I thought that they were just using Photoshop or buying templates or repurposing stuff. And so it just goes to show you, even if we think we know stuff, there's always something else that has just been staring us in the face the whole time that we didn't even know that a tool like Snappa existed.
Yeah, I mean, I think within the last year especially, there's just so many SaaS tools. I mean, typically, if you've got a problem, there's more than likely there's going to be a software that addresses that problem at this point.
So is there a reason why people should use Snappa to get their graphics created as opposed to hiring it out or figuring out other software?
So, I mean, in terms of hiring it out, there's obviously two things. So number one is budget. So we typically have a lot of, smaller businesses that just, don't really have the budget to hire what I would say a good and competent designer. If you talk to people who've used, Fiverr or some of those really cheap outsourcing services, you'll usually hear a lot of nightmare stories within that. And then the other thing that actually surprised me, through talking to our customers, a lot of them actually do have a full-time, in-house designer in their company, but they're busy working on, what I would call higher level design work. Whereas, when nowadays, if you take Twitter, for example, I mean, you send out a tweet, it's disappearing within, usually a couple minutes because of how crowded news feeds are. And even Facebook is kind of the same thing. So it's really not in the best interest of an organization to have, a full-time designer that, they're paying quite good money to create a graphic that may not even be visible for more than a day or more than a few minutes. And so I think that's why a lot of the, social media managers that use our tool, they would much rather just, spend the 2 minutes or so that it takes to create, push it out themselves, and then be able to kind of modify it for later, rather than, that back and forth that goes on with working with the designer. And so at the end of the day, it just becomes a speed thing.
Okay, great. And I can relate to that a lot in that on one hand, I don't want to have to look up all the proper dimensions, and then some of these graphics that are out there are way cooler than something that I could create. And then I've gone a bunch of different times to get those social graphics created, and I feel like I'm doing more work than the person I'm hiring, right? I'll go and I'll look up similar social media graphics, and I'll say, I want something that's sort of the colors on this one and sort of similar to that one. And then usually when it comes back, it just seems like they just sort of clicked around randomly and found something that sort of matches, not quite. And I look at that sometimes and think geez, I could almost do that myself just by clicking around and choosing some random stuff. So yeah, I think that this sort of tool is definitely needed. But as you know, there are a few other tools sort of in the similar space. So can you tell me what sets you guys apart?
Yeah, so a couple things. So from day one, we really focused 100% on ease of use. So what I find with a lot of the online tools that exist, they're almost somewhat replicating Photoshop, which, for our purposes isn't really the goal. We have a fraction of the feature set that Photoshop does, but that's actually a good thing because it's way easier to use. It's much faster. So another thing is our content library. So what you'll notice with a lot of the other players in the space is they usually have at least some kind of free plan, and what they'll do is they'll monetize based on the content library. So they'll offer some free graphics and some free stock photos, and then some free templates. But then what they'll do is to use certain graphics and certain certain photos that you have to pay like $1 each time. And the worst thing is if you want to reuse that graphic or that you've created a week down the line, sometimes you'll have to repay for that same photo that you've used. So what we've done instead is we tried to make it super easy. So all of the graphics, all of the photos in our library are completely free, and we don't do any sort of microtransactions. So you're either on our free plan and everything's 100% free, or you're on our premium plan, and then there's a low monthly fee and no added costs onto that. And then finally, we also integrate directly with Facebook and Twitter, and we also have a buffer integration. So if you create a graphic with our tool, you can then schedule it on the spot rather than having to download it, upload it into your social media tool, and then schedule it from there. So in a nutshell, we really just focus heavily on ease of use, speed, and just making the library very accessible.
Awesome. I love it. So none of those microtransactions, regular monthly fee, and then taking out a couple of clicks every time by having it integrate right in. And so, like, how did this even start? Like, where did you get the idea and how did you build this up?
So I was actually working on another business at the time. So this would have been, a few years back. And I was essentially doing all the content marketing for our startup. And I'm not a designer. And so every time I was, creating a blog post and I needed a feature image or some visuals to go along with the content, I was just wasting a ton of time in Photoshop, scouring, stock photo libraries and all that kind of stuff. And I just thought, man, there's got to be a tool for this. And when I did some searching, I found that the tools were either had like a lot of features but were just overly complicated, or they were easy to use but almost too simple, where it was more or less a quote generator, like you can just slap text on a background and that was about it. And so I kind of envisioned Snappa to kind of come in the middle, where you can still create really good stuff, but it was still much simpler and much easier to use than anything else that existed. And so we started kind of building this out on the side while we were still working on our last business. And then eventually, this obviously showed a lot more promise. So we sold off the last business and focused 100% on Snappa.
Super awesome. So number one, you scratched your own itch. And then number two, when that grew faster than the other stuff, you sold off what wasn't exciting or what wasn't as fast paced and went all in on this. And I can definitely relate to what you're talking about as far as trying these different tools and being stuck in one extreme or the other. Either you can't hardly do anything with some of these tools, or you can do so much that I don't even know what I'm looking at. And I sometimes look at it like, oh, if only it was like set up as with the user interface like Photoshop, at least I know how to navigate all this complexity, but it's a whole other learning curve. So that's great that you have built something that's sort of right there in the middle, what people are actually looking for. So as far as people putting together these social graphics, do you have any like do's and don'ts handy? Or is there anything where there are things that people should know going in using your tool?
Yeah, I mean, I usually, especially for our audience, the number one tip I gave is just to keep it simple. So, typically the more stuff that you add on the graphic, the worse it tends to become. And we have a lot of templates embedded into Snappa, which makes things much easier. So starting with a blank canvas, especially if you're not a designer, is really intimidating. So we give a lot of templates to start from. So from there, it's just a matter of swapping out the background and the text and that kind of stuff. And then I think the other kind of really important thing with design, especially for beginners, is just contrast. So if you're using a dark background, then you're going to want to use light text. And similarly, if you're using a light background, you're going to want to use dark text just to make sure that it's super readable. And those are like really the main two things. We actually wrote a blog post on our blog that's like 17 graphic design tips for non-designers. And that kind of covers a bit more stuff if people are interested.
So that sounds great. Is there an easy way for people to find that post? Is that a link off of snappa.com?
Yeah, so if they go to blog.snappa.com, that will be kind of the main page for a blog. And if they go to the sidebar, you'll see it'll say helpful or featured articles, and then they can find the article right there.
Super great. And so since we're on the topic of helping people to use your tool better, like where should people be using this graphics, and like what sort of, I don't even know how to ask this, but like what are the graphics made for? Like, are they for Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all the above? Am I missing any? Like what sort of graphics should we be creating for social media, I guess?
Yeah, so I think one of the most important use cases for Snappa is first and foremost for your blog images, and especially the blog featured image. So when you share an article on Facebook, for example, assuming you're blogging on WordPress, it's going to pull in that featured image. So you really want to have a nice custom made graphic as opposed to just like a generic stock image. And I think BuzzSumo.com did a study where they compared the top shared articles, and they compared those that had a featured image versus those that didn't have a featured image. And it was something like the ones that did have a featured image on average got like twice as many shares as the one that don't. So, at an absolute bare minimum, you should definitely be creating a custom featured image for every piece of blog content that you put out. And then the second major use case is definitely social media. So, social is becoming more crowded, and now we have, more visuals, the importance of visuals being, placed on it. So, for example, if let's say you're running an e-commerce store and you're selling t-shirts and you have a sale coming up, you can write out a text post saying, oh, we've got an upcoming sale on, such and such date, come, check it out. However, if you create a nice graphic around that, where maybe you're showcasing one of the items, you've got all the details on the sale in that graphic, that will typically get much more engagement than just a text post. So we encourage our users when possible, try to create, try to use visuals when you're promoting on social media as opposed to just plain text. And then beyond that, it's really popular for, ads. So obviously Facebook ads is really huge. So creating the image for the ads, display ads. And then you can get, even more crazier. Like we have people that create their banners for SoundCloud, or, they create their podcast art. So, I mean, really, you can create, any type of online graphic. And then we have all the sizes for all the popular things like, social, blogging, all that kind of stuff.
Super cool. So that way it makes it that much easier. And I've definitely come across that where sometimes I've shared a blog post of mine on social media and gotten that dreaded gray stick figure sort of looking thing that I look at it and say, yep, it means that they couldn't even find a featured image for that post. Or sometimes if I was using a theme that didn't let me use a featured image, or I didn't use one of those SEO plugins, I'd share a post on social media and it would just show like a picture of one of the commenters or just some random image from the page. And I'm like, oh, I don't want to show that. I'd rather have some more control over that. And so yeah, so now it's going to be super easy. You should just spend a couple of seconds in each post and get that knocked out. So as far as you creating the service and building the company, I know we touched on that a little bit earlier, where this sort of was the more promising path, and you got rid of what wasn't working and went for this. So can you tell us about that? Can you tell us like how your company's been growing, and have you been coming across any growing pains or anything like that?
Yeah, so being a freemium tool with a really low price point, volume is really important for us. So we've always focused on things that were, marketing channels that were as scalable as possible. In the beginning, it was actually kind of crazy. So the other business that we were working on was kind of in the Bootstrap templates and WordPress template kind of space. And so we had written a post about where to find free stock photos, and it ended up just kind of blowing up and going viral, and we're getting a lot of traffic to that post. And so we kind of had this crazy idea of creating our own free stock photo resource with the thinking that we could then use that to promote Snappa. And so what we ended up doing was create a stock photo site called stocksnap.io, which ended up getting really popular. And so by the time that we had finished building Snappa, we kind of had a resource that was already getting a lot of traffic, and then it was just a matter of cross promoting the tool to that audience. So we did a good job of kind of building out traffic even before we officially launched the tool. And then from there, we really focused heavily on content marketing and SEO. So we, wrote a lot of articles for things that people were searching for. So for example, we have articles about, the Facebook cover size and best practices, and, Twitter header size and best practices. And then we set up, site pages for each of the use cases. Like we have a page for creating banners, and we have a page for creating ads and all that kind of stuff. And so we just did a lot of content, a lot of guest posting, a lot of link building, and really just focused on that.
Okay, and you know what? I've experienced this sort of similar path myself, and I've heard the same kind of thing from people over and over, that sometimes you have to create project A and see how well it sells for project B to reveal itself, and that many times the skills that you end up learning or applying in project A end up translating in a lot of different ways to project B. So even if you end up closing or selling off one of those businesses, it's never a waste, because so many times you don't even realize it until later on that you figure out skills for one thing and then they apply to something else.
Yeah, totally. So like in the beginning, we knew that if we have a tool that's freemium and it's $10 a month, and we're going to need thousands of signups, we knew that it was going to be much easier to launch that kind of business if we already had a bit of a stream of traffic, versus if you're creating software that's like $1,000 a month, then you only really need a couple customers in the beginning to get going.
Right. So how big have you guys grown? Like, what size is your team?
So right now we're a team of 5, and we haven't raised any money, so it's all been bootstrapped and grown organically. So we're pretty happy with where we're come, and we still grinding out every day in and day out.
Super cool. So do you think that along this journey, are there any really important lessons you've learned along the way, or like if you could send a message back to your past self, does anything come to mind as far as really important lessons that you figured out?
Yeah, I mean, Snappa was kind of like the 4th business that I would say real business that we had kind of tried to start, and it was obviously the most successful that we've done, and whereas the first 3 we've I think we learned a lot of our lessons in the first 3 business, and fortunately Snap has gone pretty well. But the lessons that we did learn is the most important, I think, for us was not validating not validating our businesses properly. So we fell victim to creating a solution when there wasn't really a problem. So when we did create Snappa, we actually did a lot of research and customer interviews and Skype calls with potential customers even before we started building it. And obviously that gave us a lot more confidence to start working on the product. Whereas everything else that we had kind of just done it in reverse order, and ended up wasting a lot of time. So.
And that's simple, but that's really powerful. That instead of you guys going into a basement or, closing the blinds and spending 3 months on something and then coming out and saying, surprise, we made this thing, let's see who likes it. You went to see what people were missing, what people needed, and then created that thing for them, which, again, like, it sounds really simple, but I think that you and I have both seen a lot of people just miss that really important process there.
Yeah, and not only that, just a step further, we even started, essentially marketing even before we had, even before the product was finished, and that was another thing that we kind of failed to do. And so, now if ever I launch a new product, number one, I think about, okay, is there actually a need, and I try to validate it as much as possible. And then the other thing I think about is, like, do we even have a good way to market this from day one? Because sometimes you can have a great idea, but if you don't really have a clear path to how you're going to get that product in customers' hands, that's not going to go away once you launch it. You're still going to have to figure that out. So.
Right. It's not going to sell itself. And then on the flip side of that also, I remember when I was maybe 19, 20 years old, there was some marketer out there who was selling for $97 a PHP script that would personalize a person's first name on a headline. And I thought to myself, what the heck? That's 6 lines of code. It's selling for $97, but it's not about the work put in. It's about what people want. I love it. And then going back to your story there about how the first 4 companies sort of failed. The very first time I heard about Elon Musk years and years ago, it was that he said that, like, PayPal was the 5th company that he started or something like that. So it's like all these other little failures that kind of, I don't know, built up the thick skin or built up what didn't work. And then it took sort of those mistakes to get to the thing that was the big hit. And then even that wasn't the end. So it's like an ongoing process here.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the entrepreneurs that I know, it's very rare that their first product was the home run. And, in our case, it's not like everything we've launched was complete failure, but it's just they weren't to the point where you can feed a family and whatnot. But each thing that we launched, we learned more and more. We got more comfortable in the next thing, and that's really all it is you just gotta keep at it. Eventually you start learning more and more, and you just get better and better at it.
Yeah, totally. And the way you're describing it sounds like we don't want our first company to be a huge hit. We don't want to win the lottery on our first try, because then we don't know what caused that. By seeing the failures, then we get a better handle on what actions aren't working, what actions are working. So as far as the future of Snappa and the things you have going on, do you have anything exciting on the horizon? Anything you're willing to share in that area?
Yeah, I mean, we do a lot of customer development still. So we listen to our customers and kind of develop the tool along with them. We recently launched a team plan, so more than one people can kind of share and collaborate on graphics together. And we just rolled out some big upgrades to the content library. So we're continuing to evolve the tool. We have our kind of our short-term roadmap, and beyond that is always kind of in flux. So I usually don't like to promise things too far out, just because it typically changes so quickly.
Right, that makes sense. Why plan out all these years ahead when things on the internet change so quickly? So that tool is snappa.com, and when people go to snappa.com right now, can you tell us about what the pricing model is, and also maybe why people should go and sign up right now and not wait?
Yeah, so we have a free plan, so that if you only have to create a couple graphics per month, then the free plan should be good for you forever. If you have more usage requirements, our pro plan starts out at $10 per month if on an annual basis, or $15 month to month. And that will basically have unlimited usage. So that's the most you'll ever have to pay us.
Fantastic. So makes it really simple, really affordable, and hopefully figure out a way to charge more that we have a faster growing company, right?
Yeah, so that's one of the reasons we built out the team plan, which is a bit more expensive, but still nothing crazy. So yeah, in terms of evolution for Snappa, we're kind of thinking about what can we add on to it beyond just a graphic editor, and we have some ideas in mind. Not sure if it will be kind of the same product or kind of like branching off into a separate product, but that's some of the things that we're always thinking about.
Awesome. Always innovating. So Snappa.com, and so is Snappa.com the place to go, or is there any other resources, or is just that the number one destination?
Yeah, that's the best place to go and kind of get all the information in terms of what's included and why it's a great tool. So it's a good place to go.
Cool. So all you out there in podcast land, you heard that. You need to go right now to Snappa.com. That's with 2 P's, and it's like when you're snapping your fingers. So Snappa.com sounds like a great tool you and your team have built, Chris. And thanks for stopping by and for telling us all about it and for teaching us some really cool stuff. So I appreciate it. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
We really appreciate you listening to today's episode of Marketer of the Day. Subscribe to us on iTunes and rate and review us at marketeroftheday.com/iTunes.